Hey guys, it's Vicky, and I'm here today to share with you my April wrap-up, all of the books that I read in the month of April. April was a really good reading month for me. I read 5 books, and most of them I gave really high ratings, at least for me, and I really enjoyed them, so I'm really excited to share them with you, so let's do it. The first book that I read in April was Misery by Stephen King. This is one of those like Stephen King classics. I think everybody has at least heard of it. It was made into a movie, so it's one of his more well-known works, and I really enjoyed this book. It's basically about an author named Paul Sheldon who is traveling in a rural part of Colorado during a snowstorm and gets into a car wreck and is rescued by this woman named Annie Wilkes, who is a nurse, luckily for him, is his self-proclaimed #1 fan, but she's also, insane. So, he is in her house being nursed back to health by this woman, and, it's kind of goes from there. You know from basically page 1 that Annie is not right, and Paul knows it too. Within the first page, he's like, I think I'm in trouble here. And you're like, yeah, Paul, you are. And yeah, there's some stuff that happens where you're just like, holy crap, this chick is crazy. But it's a really interesting book because Paul obviously fears Annie. She's kind of crazy, does some crazy stuff, but he also needs her because in the accident, both of his legs are broken, his pelvis is broken, he can't walk, he's in a ton of pain, and Annie is feeding him, bathing him, and of course giving him painkillers so that he can deal with the pain. So he like needs her, but at the same time, she's crazy. So, and I'm sorry if you can hear my 2-year-old right now. She's supposed to be napping, but she is up there playing around. So at least she's having a good time. So yeah. So this book is really interesting because it is basically Paul, Annie, and they're in this room, and you're just like, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of, like I said, there's some gory bits, some, just like cringy bits, that'll just, ugh. But the driving force is you're like, okay, how is Paul gonna get out of this? Like, how is he gonna get out of this woman's grasp, And so that really drives you, and I think it comes to a really satisfying conclusion in the end, and I really, really liked it. So I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was The Zookeeper's Wife by Diane Ackerman, and I don't have a hard copy because I had to return it to the library. But it is a nonfiction book centering around a husband and wife named Jan and Antonina Jabinski, I want to say is how you pronounce it. My Polish is not so good. And they are the owners, operators, whatever, of the Warsaw Zoo in Poland during like World War II. And when the Nazis occupy Warsaw, the zoo gets pretty messed up, destroyed, whatever, and they end up closing it down. But the Jabinskis are able to still live there, and they have a few animals. Most of them, though, were sent off to other zoos, and they are still living there in their villa and decide to basically help people escape Warsaw in the ghetto, and save them from the Nazis, basically. And I thought that it was a really good book because for being nonfiction, for one, it didn't read like nonfiction. Like sometimes nonfiction can get kind of clinical and, it gets real facty. Is that a word? But like where you're kind of, it just can kind of get a little mundane sometimes. But I thought that this was really engaging and interesting. This book did a really good job of humanizing what happened because of the people involved, were human beings. And I should note that during those years that the Jabinskis were helping people escape, they helped 300 people escape from Poland, and only 2 people out of those 300 didn't make it to the end of the war. So that's pretty amazing. and obviously they're heroes for what they did. And I think what made the book so good, getting back to what I was saying, is that most of the book is anecdotal stories about the people that kind of came through their house and stayed with them as they were trying to escape. So you learn about these people and that they were, you know, they were average, normal people that just happened to be in this really crappy situation, and it just kind of gave the horror of that part of the war like a human element, and I just really, really appreciated that and liked it a lot. So again, I ended up giving that book 4 out of 5 stars. So yeah. The next book that I read in the month of April was The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. And I did a full book review of this book, so I'm not going to go too much into detail about it. If you want to know my deep thoughts, you can check out that video. But basically this book tells the story of a teenage boy named Christopher who has autism, and he is investigating the death of a neighborhood dog. So there is a bit of a, you know, mystery element going on, but it's mostly a character study about Christopher and his autism and how it affects his world and how he makes his way through the world. So I really, really liked Christopher and his story, and I really enjoyed this read. So I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished this month was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. And oh my gosh, you guys, I have never read this book before, and I can't believe I waited this long in my life to read this book because I absolutely loved this book. I am a fan of kind of gothic literature anyway, and this is like the queen of gothic to me. It was just fantastic. It tells the story of Jane Eyre, and it is narrated by Jane, and it just takes you through her life from when she is a little girl up until she's about 20, early 20s maybe, and you just kind of go through her life, but there's so much that happens in the book, and I went into it completely blind, not knowing any of the plot or having seen any of the film adaptations, so all of the little twists and turns that the plot takes, I didn't see coming, I didn't know, and I just like totally loved that aspect because there is definitely like a mystery aspect going on in this book. The characters are fantastic. I think Jane was just a great character. I totally related to her. The writing was just beautiful. What else can I say about this book? How much I loved this book. There was just so much going on and so much to process, as you know, classics tend to do. I cannot wait to delve back into this again someday, because I know that I will pick up on more things every time I read it. For all these years, I would say that Little Women has been my favorite classic ever, but now this one I think is kind of elbowing its way into first place. I don't know. It's like a toss-up. So, yeah. I just really loved this book. 5 out of 5 stars, hands down. Yup. And if you haven't checked out Jane Eyre, please, please do, because it's great. The last book that I read this month was The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. And this book was pretty interesting. It's a nonfiction book about a woman named Henrietta Lacks who, in the 50s, she died of cervical cancer, and it was a very aggressive form. It was a pretty bad, you know, death for her. And she was fairly young. She was only like 31 when she passed away. She left behind a husband and 5 children, and she was black, living in Baltimore. And so the hospital she went through was Johns Hopkins, and when she was there, they took some of her cells without her consent or her family's consent, and figured out that they could multiply them and make them grow, or they could grow on their own, basically indefinitely, which ended up being a very awesome thing for science, because they have since, in the past, you know, 50, 60 years, since she passed away, they have used her cells, you know, to help develop the polio vaccine, to help with all kinds of different vaccines for different diseases. Obviously, cancer research was a big thing. even like HIV and all kinds of things. Her cells helped to further those studies and things, so it was great. But the problem was that they, you know, the standard practice then was to take those kinds of things from people without asking. Her family didn't even know for probably like 20 years that they had even taken her cells and that they were using her cells in that way. So, and they of course never saw any sort of recognition or compensation because Henrietta's name was never even really attached to the cells. And so she never got that recognition either. So this book is very much about giving Henrietta Lacks and her family the recognition that they deserve because of what she did for science. But it's also very much about the hardships and stuff that her family experienced, you know, due to her loss and since then. And I think that the book was very interesting in that Rebecca Skloot was really good about writing about the science aspect of it, especially for someone like me who is not, I'm not a scientific kind of person. But that part it was interesting to read about that whole part of the story, the science aspect. I really found that interesting. And I also loved the human interest aspect. I loved hearing about Henrietta's life and her family, and just her history, because it was very interesting but also heartbreaking. My only con that I had with this book was that I did not like so much that Rebecca Skloot kind of put herself into the story. You know, I studied journalism in college. I have a journalism degree. So for some reason that just didn't sit well with me because it took away from the story sometimes. It kind of pulled me away when she started talking about how she got the story and how she got to meet the family and whatnot. It just kind of, like I said, it just kind of pulled me away, and I don't know, it just didn't really sit well with me. And I thought that sometimes the structure of the book was a little bit uneven. It just, and kind of, I don't know, kind of jarring, I guess. So I think that the story was great, and I'm so glad it was told, and I'm so glad that I read it. But like I said, the structure of the book was a little and I didn't like that the writer put herself into the story. So I ended up giving the book 3 out of 5 stars. Alright guys, so those were the 5 books that I read in the month of April. And like I said, I was really happy with the books I read. I thought that I read some really great stuff this month, and I'm really glad that it went good. I hope that you guys had a good reading month too, and please feel free to tell me in the comments what you read this month, or if you have any recommendations for me, because I'm always willing to take those. So just please let me know if you know of any good books that I could read soon. And I just want to thank you for watching, and I hope that you are having a good week, and I will talk to you soon.